just fuck me up. Hello there. My name's Bino, and I want to talk about recording drums. Now, bear with me. This is the first time I've ever done a video like this. I don't know what any of this shit is, and I'm fucking scared. Um, but I want to talk about some general production stuff, music production. I think I'm pretty good at it, so I want to make some videos about it. A fun place to start is with drums. Now, a sort of general guideline checklist of things that are important to think about when recording any instrument. There's like a sort of hierarchy of important things. The most important thing is the general room acoustics. And then, from there it goes down to acoustics of the room, the instruments and the performers of the instruments, microphone placement, and then the microphones themselves. So it's going to be a little bit before I get to the microphone part, though, which is what most people want to know. But, these are important things to know. So, acoustics for room bullshit. What are the most important things? Well, you don't need to, you can get kind of in the weeds with this stuff, though, but some very general basic information. What you want to do, though, is that one, you just need a nice sounding place. Now, if you're looking for a more acoustically dry sound, a more like sort of 80s artificial reverb, dead control rooms, dead recording rooms, dead everything, then you want a dead area. You want a place that doesn't have a lot of acoustic reflections. But if you're looking for more of a sort of like livelier, kind of loud, long decay rock kind of vibe, then you want to be in a place that facilitates that. Now, not every place is going to be able to have like a large live room to record in, so a lot of that stuff's going to be artificial. But though, you can still get a good sounding room. Now, what constitutes a good sounding room? Well, you have to trust your ears for that, though. Don't get too self-conscious about it, or don't try to like psych yourself out. But there is something to be wary about. Is that, a good test, if you're in a room, just to give it a nice little clap. And listen to the clap, listen to how it sounds and the decay of it. Because a lot of times, I think it's a very specific phenomenon. It's called flutter echoes. It's basically a very specific kind of echo that can happen when you have two untreated parallel walls. So either wall to wall, floor to ceiling.
We have these bare walls. And actually, you can hear what the flutter echo is. If we do this, that sound, if you hear that's because the sound reflects from this one, that one goes back and forth, and that's what the flutter echo is.
The best way to do it is just, whatever normal space you're in or whatever space you have available, to just try to acoustically treat it to kill some of those reflections. Now, those reflections happen in a sort of mid-high to high frequency spectrum range. Those are the most egregious. But luckily enough, though, they're one of the most easiest to treat, because the lower the frequency you want to absorb, the denser or thicker the material is needed to soak up that frequency spectrum. So if you're just trying to cover the mid to mid-high stuff, though, all you need is like a thick carpet, rug, or even like blankets and stuff like that. That will cover most of those reflections. Moving blankets, or packing blankets, that's the term. Packing blankets are a really good way to solve for this problem. That's usually what I recommend to people, especially for like putting stuff on the walls. And packing blankets, they're very large, so you can use them to drape a very large area if need be, but you can also very easily just fold it upon itself. And the thicker the blankets are when you fold them up, though, the more frequencies they're going to absorb. So you can start to get more of the low mid frequencies if you start to like fold up those blankets and put them on the walls. So that's really cool. That's really good for like the wall to wall stuff. For the floor to ceiling stuff, I just generally recommend people just throw some shit on the floor, like a carpet or a thick rug or something. That's easier than just trying to kill the reflections on the ceiling. It's cool if you can, though, but the problem is that, like, one, nailing shit to the ceiling is fucking tough, and two, if you don't take the time to build the things properly, the acoustic panels on the ceiling properly, they look fucking awful. Some of them, I'm looking at them right now. I wish I spent more time on because they do kind of suck. I think that one, those kind of look fine. Those don't look too good. So, if you have any considerations about either, in having family, friends, clients you're trying to impress, or Tinder dates over, it does look kind of nasty if you put them on the ceiling. I don't fucking know. All bottoms are degenerates. They live nasty little lives. Don't believe their Instagram. They never go outside. Or they don't, they're not going on brunches and jogs and social events. They're little fucking gremlins who never leave their room. They sleep with like a mattress on the floor, no bed frame, just cat shit embedded in their carpet, alright? They live disgusting little lives. They have no standards. If that's the worst thing you got on your ceiling, you're fine. Don't even worry about it. What the fuck was I talking about? Yeah, recording drums. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, just throw some packing blankets on the walls, lay some heavy carpet down, and you're gonna be fine. Okay. Next thing. What the fuck is the next thing? Oh yeah, the instruments and the players. So if you're recording somebody else playing the drums, then it's an important thing to listen to them play the drums. The way that you're going to mic a drum set, if you have, a jazzier, more dynamic drummer versus a very aggressive rock drummer, it's going to be completely different. Sometimes if you're having a heavy rock drummer, sometimes you just need to mic the individual toms and the cymbals and stuff just so you have some faders to, kind of goose in the mixing phase to kind of push up when the big loud drum fills and the boom 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 parts come in, that's an important thing to have. And if you're going for a more like Motown, Stax Records kind of sound, less microphones are going to be more conducive into getting that sound. And also listening to how the drum set sounds itself though can also be a consideration that you may want to take into fact. Like for instance, miking up a drum that doesn't have a resonant head, that just has like just some blankets and pillows and shit shoved inside of it, is going to sound a lot more differently, and you would probably want to opt into a different mic technique than just a normal standard kick drum with a little like porthole inside of it. Same thing if you have toms that don't have bottom heads. Same thing if you have like a sort of I don't know, snares kind of all sound the same a little bit. Drums, I feel like there's less variance from drum kit to drum kit in regards to mic selection. Most drums I feel like fall in a pretty conventional range of sounds. Like the instrument themselves, I feel like don't deviate too far. The drummers themselves, though, are the more important factor in there. Like, for instance, I feel like, if the tonality and range of, like, let's say a guitar or a bass or something like that, I feel like the instruments themselves fall into more variety. Like, the actual sound that's produced by them falls into more variety than, let's say, like a drum set, for instance. Like, snares kind of sound sort of the same. I feel like if you have a good snare mic on one situation, it's going to sound good on another situation, though. But more importantly, I feel like is the mic techniques are the thing you really need to be worried about more than anything. And I think that's determined by what kind of sound the artist or the producer is going for, and what's conducive to how the drummer plays. So beyond that, though, the next thing is the mic. Oh God. Allergies are terrible. So what's the next thing? The next thing is the microphones themselves. Now, what are some general recommendations that I give to people for recording the drums? There are a lot of nice microphones. I'm a microphone junkie myself, though, so I collect a lot of microphones, a lot of really nice microphones. However, a lot of people don't have access to a lot of nice microphones. So some general recommendations and things that I kind of like to use on the drums that are pretty cheap. Let's go with some simple ones. Snare drum. Now, caveat, or not caveat. What does that word even mean? A warning or proviso of specific stipulations, conditions, or limitations. I don't like that definition. I'm just going to use whatever made up definition I like to use when using the word caveat. So, bite me. So for me though, personally, I don't like dynamic microphones on the drums. Now, a lot of people do, and there's more than one way to skin a cat in this industry. However, I just personally don't like them. What are the reasons I don't like dynamic microphones? A couple of reasons. One, the bleed that you get from dynamic microphones on the drums, I think sounds kind of nasty. The argument that most people say is that if you have dynamic microphones, it has better rejection and you get less bleed from the rest of the drum kit. My counter argument to that is that, well, the bleed that you do get kind of sucks. And especially once you start doing distortion, compression, EQ, you start to bring up that background bleed even more, and then you're having to fight through it throughout the entire session, constantly having to gate shit, and it's just a lot of work. I hate it. And me, I'm a spiritually very lazy person. I like to do as little work as possible, which is why I like condenser microphones on the drums, because what I would do is that, one, there is more bleed coming in from the hi-hat and the cymbals and shit using condenser microphones. However, the bleed sounds a lot better. And what I'll do is that I will actually use that bleed from the drum mics to build an overall picture of the drum kit. So, like, for instance, with like my tom mics, a great example is that if I have like, I'm doing a session or whatever, and I have tom mics on the drums, and I will leave the tom mics turned on the drum set, even if the drummer doesn't play the toms during a certain song, because I use the bleed from those condenser microphones and the toms to build an overall picture of the drum kit. It becomes a part of the brightness, a part of the cymbal sound, part of all the transient, high-end little information that makes up the drum kit. So, as a result, the microphones I'm going to be recommending are condenser microphones, for some of them. So, something to keep in mind. So, for the snare microphone, I like the Octava MK012. It's a super cheap, small diaphragm condenser microphone. I'm actually using one for the voiceover mic in this this session right here. It's super cheap. I think you can get it for like $200, and it's like a kit. It comes with a cardioid capsule and a omnidirectional capsule as well, along with a 10 dB pad. And I usually use the 10 dB pad on the microphone while I'm recording snare, just because it's a very hot microphone, so it requires a little bit of a pad to keep the levels within acceptable range. Those microphones I think have a particularly good low end response, which makes it really good for snare drum and room mics as well for drums. For me, I particularly like a very beefy snare. I like to have a lot of low end, because I feel like that's more conducive to the actual sound of the snare drum. Because like another recommendation that a lot of people really like is the Shure SM57, and it's a microphone. Look, I don't like the microphone that much, but a lot of people do. So take my advice with a grain of salt. George Massenburg likes the SM57, and he's a better producer than I will ever be. So what's my recommendation? However, though, the sort of sound of an SM57 on the snare is like a sort of like fetishized sound that like over the years has just like wormed its way into the sort of abstracted sound of what we think of a snare drum being, like that very classic mid-range kind of whack that the SM57 has is a very classic snare sound. I Again, I just particularly don't like it though. But it's not to say that it's a bad sound, or no, it's a bad sound. Not to say that it's a sound that you may not be fond of, because again, it's all about your ears, and it's all cares about, it's all about what you like, these are recommendations coming from me though, but again, you're the person who has to call all the shots. I'm not going to be there to produce your record for you. I'm not going to be there to mix and record everything there for the session. You are. So as a result, everything has to go through the sort of filter of your ears. You're the sort of gatekeeper of good sounds, if you will. So if something doesn't sound good to you, then just don't do it. I just, hope these recommendations maybe are useful. The SM57 sound for the snare is not something I'm particularly fond of, but you may like it. It's a $50 microphone. You can't go wrong with that. If you need a microphone for $50, the SM57 is great for it. But I try to get people to buy nicer microphones. So the Octava MK012 is a recommendation I like to give. And I think it's a really cheap option as well. I think it's really good. Some good kick mics. Now, a general observation I feel like I've made over the years, as you move through the frequency spectrum, you have to spend more money on a microphone to find one that can pleasingly and naturally reproduce a certain frequency. So I tend to find that cheap microphones actually reproduce the low frequencies really well and really nice. Like a lot of really good options for kick drums and also bass guitar as well. The AKGD 112, I think is a really good kick drum microphone. Has a nice scooped mid-range that is pretty useful for most kick drum sounds. If you're looking for one that has more of a mid-range kind of pop to it, the Electro Voice RE20 is a really good microphone for that too. Also, that one's a really good one for bass guitar as well. The AKGD 112 could be good for bass as well, though, if you're looking for more of like an aggressive metal kind of bass guitar. But both of those microphones, I think, work really well on the kick drum. For overhead microphones, this is where I'd start to recommend finding either some really full-bodied condenser microphones, maybe some large diaphragm microphones that you'd use on vocals, or opting in to use something like ribbon microphones. I think both can get some really pleasing results. For ribbon microphones, I think a really good option, or that's in an affordable price range, is something like a Byron 160. It's a little more on the pricier side. I think like 400, 500 around there. But I tend to think it sounds really good as an overhead microphone, especially using it in certain configurations. I think you can get some really good results. Another good option is the Sound Deluxe U195, I believe is the name. It's like a sort of like kind of a U87 kind of microphone. I think that one also sounds really good. Has a little fat switch on it that you can engage for like a lot more low end boost. And I think that can be very helpful in minimal miking techniques where maybe the kick drum is a little bit compromised and you're trying to get a good sound out of the microphone. But let's talk about some miking techniques, because to me this is probably more important to deciding what microphone you want to use than anything else. So what are some options you should use? So for minimal miking techniques, a really good one for one mic techniques, finding like a full range ribbon microphone or a full-bodied condenser microphone, and putting it sort of where the right tom of the drummer would be. So if you're looking at the drum set and there's snare drum, there's a left tom and the right tom, you sort of remove the right tom and have it placed right there, directly aimed at the snare drum. This one I think actually has like a really good sort of blend between snare, kick, and the rest of the kit. I'm going to do a test with one, and I'm going to use a Beyer M160 for it. And I think it's a good choice for it. With this miking technique, I think that the biggest thing that is compromised is the kick drum. So a really good way to solve this problem in post is actually to use a multi-band compressor. And set one of the bands on the low end, compress it a little bit, and then turn up the output of that band of the compressor, post compression, and balance it to where you feel like it has a hefty kick drum sound, or it sounds balanced. You could also do that for the mid range if you feel like the snare maybe is a little bit lacking though, but I tend to find that's not too big of a deal. But it also depends on the drummer as well. If they're a very light drummer, then you may need to try some of that little bit of trickery, or maybe add in a snare drum mic if you feel like the snare is a little lacking. All right. So hey there. What was it? I'm recording this after the fact. I wanted to add as a little bit of an addendum to that information that the multi-band compression method for the one mic technique also works well, but also if you want to, a better method actually is to duplicate the entire signal, low pass all of the mid to high frequencies, and then just start to raise that level of the signal until you start to feel the kick drum again, until you start to feel the low end heft of the signal. Just kind of blend it to taste, and that's a good way to fix the low end problem that comes from using a one mic technique like this. A couple also methods that you could do to get a better kick drum signal is to actually delay that signal just by a couple milliseconds, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, something that just kind of play around with it, see if it makes sense though, and you have this sort of almost movement to the kick drum, kind of like an 808 drum where it has this nice punchy attack, but then it has this sort of low sub kind of movement, like there's the punch and then the kind of sub sound. And I kind of like to do that with a lot of my kick drums. So just delay that by a couple of seconds, and not by a couple seconds, a couple milliseconds. And it's a really good way to make a nice kick drum sound. Another way also, if you have a plugin that allows for this, is to use a resonant low pass filter. One that has like a variable Q option on it, because it's sort of like a normal low pass, but instead though, there's a little Q, there's a little like peak on the low pass, and as you turn up the Q on it, the peak gets higher and higher and higher, and eventually it starts to generate its own frequency as a result of the high Q value. So it almost generates this sort of sub sound from the original source. So that's a good way as well to generate a sort of fake kick drum sound, or a more heavier kick drum sound from a one mic technique like this that could be kind of compromised in the kick drum. That's it. That's all I wanted to add. Now I'm going to go back to coughing forever and ever and ever and ever. So one of my favorite ways to do a 2 drum mic technique, my favorite techniques for 2 mics on the drum set, is to actually have a sort of front of kit microphone as the overhead. You have the microphone about like 2 or 3 feet away from the kick drum, and you have the capsule of the microphone just peering right over the toms, just directly dead center of the kit. I think this is a really good way to get a nice overall presentation of the drum kit as a whole. A little bit of room tone, and also a good, nice, healthy dose of kick drum as well. The one thing that does falter in this drum set is the toms, so that's something to keep in mind. But I like combining that microphone with a snare drum mic, and and for that mic setup, you have the front of kit mic, and then you also have a snare mic as well, and I feel like those work very, very well in tandem to getting a nice, like, well-rounded drum sound. The toms are usually the thing that falters the most in that kind of setup, though, but it still sounds fine. I tend to like it a lot, though. Just, I don't know, fuck the drummer, tell him to hit the tom starter. So that's a good 2 mic setup. And a really good way to, if you want to have, to introduce an additional microphone to the setup, is to just simply add a room mic to it, though. For me, I tend to like my room mics, condenser microphones with omnidirectional capsules. And for me personally, I actually kind of like putting them on the floor instead of being high up in the air. There's some like bullshit science stuff to like, I guess, justify that reasoning. I think it's called the Haas boundary effect. But essentially, if what you want to do if you're trying to capture the tone of the room is that you want to eliminate primary or first reflections, like the primary direct sound and first reflections. So that means direct sound coming from the drum kit into whatever microphone you have as the room mic. If you have a microphone that's in the air, you're getting a lot of direct sound from the drum kit hitting the room mic, and that's making up a large breadth of the actual sound it's capturing, and not too much of the side reflections, the sound bouncing from the wall to the ceiling to the floor back into the microphone. However, if instead you put the microphone on the floor where it is like parallel to the floor, what you're doing is that you're creating a very, very narrow window for primary like directional sound and first reflections to hit the microphone. Because if you have like the microphone here and the drum set here, most of the sound that's coming direct from the drum set is going to bounce off the floor and away from the microphone before it actually gets to it. There's only a very small arrow or narrow there's only a very small narrow window for the sound of the room. Sorry. Instead, what you're doing is minimizing the amount of direct and first reflections that the room mics hear, and instead the majority of the sound or the bulk of the sound is being picked up by just the general room ambiance, if you will. So I tend to like room mics on the floor because of that reason. And just a good spot, just like, go like 20 or so, 10, 15, 20 feet or whatever, just away from the kick drum, and just put a microphone on the ground. The Octava MK012 with the omnidirectional capsule is also a really good room mic. Has a lot of good low end, so I recommend that too. From that setup, I think it's really easy to start adding additional microphones once you get more comfortable with them. Like, for instance, from there, I think that's a good starting point, like that overhead microphone and that snare drum. From there, you can just start adding on different spot mics to supplement the sound. So, for instance, from there, you can add a kick drum mic, or tom mics, or even sort of like overhead cymbal microphones. From that sort of building block, and you sort of supplement those microphones as you as needed. If the drummer is doing more tom stuff, then you just add tom microphones to that setup. If you have more cymbal stuff going on, then you just add cymbal spot mics to that setup. If you feel like you need an additional kick drum microphone, then you you just add a kick drum microphone to that 2-microphone setup. And I think that's a really good, and I think that can get you pretty far without the need to experiment too much and other things. Because also something that's important to remember, though, is that the more microphones that you add to the equation, the more likely you are to cause phasing or to cause phase problems. And especially if you don't know what you're doing, this is like if you don't really know exactly how to solve phase problems, or you're just starting out, it can be very frustrating to try to solve them. And honestly, you may just screw yourself up so bad that you just can't solve phase problems. They're just too embedded into the sound. So as a general rule of thumb, for people starting out, I usually try to recommend people just to try minimal miking setups. I think that's it for this video. I hope this was of some help with somebody. I'm going to try to make some more videos like this in the future. So subscribe and like and ring the bell and share and notify and subscribe to my Substack and my Patreon and give me my Squarespace advertisement. Hey there, Squarespace. You like squares? I've got a space for you. I don't have any of those things.